Hi, I'm Michelle. I'm a senior software engineer at Netflix. My pronouns are she, her. And today we're going to talk about something that's really important to me, is that I believe that anyone who wants to be a software engineer should be able to be a software engineer. So we're going to do kind of a case study today and ask Angela her story and go through why I think she should be a software engineer.
Wonderful. Well, my name is Angela Andrews, and I'm a solution architect at Red Hat. And I'll give you my backstory. This conversation came up at a cocktail party last night, and when we first met for the first time, and I shared my story. So here goes. I was a systems administrator by trade for many, many years, and it's a very closed circle. There's not a lot of meetups for sysadmins specifically. The community, I didn't find it to be very welcoming. I would go to a conference and I would be the only one who looked like me, and there'd be like no women, and there was no community, and I was kind of like lonely for a week at a conference because folks weren't very friendly, and I think I'm friendly for the most part, but I discovered that when my son was in high school, and he wanted to, the home and school said, we needed a website. And I was like, I know a little bit about this. And so I created this website, and I worked at an art college where I could take, web development classes for free. So I was like, oh, this is fun. I started taking classes and, started going to GDI events and all kinds of meetups, and I would TA for them. I, started teaching, and I said, wow, this is the community I've been waiting for my whole career, never had it, and I felt like I belonged. So I did the thing. In 2018, I decided to go to a full stack coding boot camp to make that transition. It felt like the best way for this structured learning, and then have this, powerhouse of a company behind you trying to get you employed. So I went through my 6 months, learned a ton. Like, you think you know something, and then you get taught by people who are so much smarter than you, and they really open your eyes to the joy that is web development. And it was my hobby. And it was like, I could make a living doing this. This is fun. I like the problem solving. We come up to the end of the cohort, and my friends are applying to jobs, and the career center keeps, you haven't filled out your paperwork. You haven't done this. And I'm like, I don't know if I want to do this. Now, I am mid-career, so I've been doing this for a long time. And I'm like, do I want to, I don't want to take a pay cut. Like, I thought about that, so that was a deterrent for me. I had just gotten a job back at my old university. I'd worked there many years ago and went back there. That was exciting. And I'm like, I didn't apply. I may have applied for a few jobs. I thought about it, but it didn't go anywhere. I was like, I don't know if I can be a developer, right? It felt too new. It felt like starting over, like almost brushing away the past 20 years of my life and starting new. And it was scary for me. So I went on to become this, back to being a sysadmin, and then got this job at Red Hat as a solution architect. And I always wonder, like, I'm watching the people who I graduated with succeed in their careers as, developers in every language and all big companies all over. And one guy's actually a VP now. It's like, how that happened in 4 years, right? But I always wonder, what if? And I almost want to say it's almost too late, because after a certain time, you're like, girl, you can't rewrite that story. But yeah, that's where our conversation started last night. And I want to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I want to pull out the first thing that really jumped out at me in your story, is that you were like, oh, these people were so much smarter than me. And I think smarter's never the right word. I think more knowledgeable on a specific subject than you.
Better word.
Yes.
I agree.
Would you think that they are more knowledgeable about you at system administration?
No.
Of course
Impossible.
not, because they've never done it, and you've done 20 years about it. I'm not more knowledgeable than you in system administration. I have 13 years of software engineering, but nothing in system administration. So it's just more of a cloud of knowledge is what I like to think about it. And now a lot of people think of it as like a ladder because we're used to school, right? You're used to first grade,
Yes.
second grade, third grade. And software engineering tries to mimic that by having junior engineer, mid, senior. But really, people come in with all this different knowledge. And the other thing that I like to talk about is that when I look to hire or I think about someone coming in, I think about three things that I want for them. One is obviously the technical knowledge. You want something in terms of that. You want some industry knowledge. So like for me, I work in entertainment. So I ask, what do they know about making movies? And the third is professional skills. And the one that's the easiest to teach is technical skills. There are 1 million Java tutorials for you to take. It's a lot harder for me to teach you how to be a professional. After 20 years, you're obviously a well-seasoned professional. You know how to have a meeting. You know how to talk to someone in senior leadership. All those things you've done before. I'm sure you've explained to someone why something was taking longer than they expected, or why you have downtime, or things like that that are very difficult for someone right out of college who might have some technical knowledge, but they don't have anything else. So that's what I like to tell a lot of people who are changing careers, to not discount it. You're not starting from zero, because you're one of those three skills, you're already at 100%. Right? So when I started, I was at zero at everything, and I had to start, my way up. And I went to art school, which is why I have this perspective of not needing that formal education to get started. And also, it wasn't right out of art school, right? I was a little older than everyone else. I didn't have your 20 years experience, but I got to enjoy 2 years stuffing letters in a mailroom just to have a job. Because apparently an art degree, isn't that like great? I don't know. I think it's super fun. Yeah, who knew? I don't know. No one, not my parents, they didn't tell me not to get an art degree. I don't know what you're talking about. But I think having those skills, you could still go into it. So the other thing that I always tell people is that I don't want to pretend that it's not difficult, but to think about the skills that you need. And when I think about my background and how I've succeeded from job to job, there's a couple of things that stand out. And then if you either have those skills or want to develop those skills, that's what I think it takes to be a software engineer. One is just thirst for knowledge and always wanting to try new things. If you see a new technology and want to explore it, that's what you need. If you see a new technology and you're daunted and you think, I don't want to learn something new, tech isn't for you, right? Every day there's something new that I have to learn. And I like that. I like that I get projects. I don't want to, be doing the same thing over and over again. It gets boring to me. So when I get a problem and I don't even know where to start, I'm like, oh, this is exciting. It's like Marie Kondo. I'm like, oh, I love mess. I'm like, and it's interesting too, like I even love messy repos and like refactoring them. I find them so fascinating because you get to dig in like a detective and figure out what people wanted to do and how to accomplish it and how to fix it. And I find that super fascinating.
Interesting.
So that type of like thirst for knowledge, right? And I'll stop here before I talk about the second thing and ask you that question. Do you feel like you enjoy technology and always want to learn?
I do. That's all I do. I mean, even in my current role, it's constant. Technology changes, software changes, the world around me changes, what my customers' wants and needs, they change. It's a constant, it swings from one thing to the next. And I am intrigued by that because I'm curious. I'm always curious. It's almost if I think if I had a better attention span, it would be horrible. Like I wouldn't be able to thrive because I like the fact that I can kind of pivot easily and learn this new thing. And, thank goodness for the internet and all the great resources that are out there that it feeds your thirst and you can learn just enough to be able to speak intelligently about something and feel comfortable. Now, again, it doesn't make you a specialist or a subject matter expert for that matter, but it gives you the tools and it kind of feeds you. It's like, okay, I learned this new thing. And if it's really interesting, you continue. Sometimes it's just enough, especially if you want to be able to speak to something. But if it's something that you need to do your job, you put in the time and you learn it and you incorporate it into your daily thing, right? That becomes a part of what you do. So yes, that part I get. I think that's why I stayed in technology so long, because it's always changing and it's always giving me an opportunity to do something different. It never gets stale. It never gets stale.
Yeah, and I heard that from you as you were talking about how self-motivated you were with the volunteering and the starting the website and all of that. I could hear that you were saying like, "Oh, I'm ready to like jump in on this and get started." So the other thing that you're probably extremely familiar with is problem solving. Is that something breaks and you don't panic. Because again, you're an adult with professional skills. You know, I think back to my first job as a support engineer and the first thing that I broke and someone called me and said like, where's my file that like, and I didn't know how to bring it back. I didn't understand how like backups worked. And I'm just like blanching and going to my manager. I'm like, I don't know how to do this, you know, and every single time that I solved something, the next time was slightly easier. Until now, when I get a problem where I'm like, I have no idea why this is failing, I'm always like, well, let's just jump in, right? And I have all my methods that go in. Like, my first method is it's always a permission problem. But all those other things.
Or DNS.
Yes. So it's always one of the, or a time zone problem.
Could be, yep.
You know, those are the big ones. But, you know, you always jump in. You look at the logs. You have all those methods of doing it. And just being enthusiastic about problem solving and not being daunted by constant problems. Like, I've talked to someone once who just didn't want to deal with problems every day. And I'm like, well, this probably isn't for you because that's all there is. Like, if you're solving something that's already been solved, you're doing the wrong thing. You should have just let that other solution go. I see that all the time with engineers who they see a problem and they're like, oh, I want to solve it myself. I'm like, well, did you try seeing if there's like an open source tool or a cloud service? Like, those are the ones you let them solve. And then with the ones that are a mystery, you get to go solve them, the very daunting ones. So if you're excited about that, you should be a software engineer.
Oh, okay. Well, problem solving has been a bedrock in my career. Things break constantly. Your phone doesn't ring unless something's wrong, right? So I'm constantly on the receiving end of something where it's, you know, something's wrong. You have to figure it out. Why? It's your job, you know, and even if you're not the last person to resolve something, if it gets to you, you need to do your best to try to figure it out. So it's always the log. It's always asking those really open-ended questions that people can kind of feed you information and you want to pull out of them, well, exactly what happened, you know? And if it's something that's, you know, a system that you're supporting, well, you know how it's supposed to work, right? So you have that knowledge and you're trying to dig in. There's always the logs. There's always, you know, checking timestamps. You always, you know, if something's detrimental, you always want to make sure, is there a backup before I go mucking around in here, you know, or some, you know, is it a system down issue? If it's not a system down issue, if there's redundancy built in, you're like, okay, I can judge how I can deal with this. You know, if it is production down, you have to worry about that SLA and bringing things up. But if you have the opportunity to kind of dig in and, you know, maybe bring someone else in, because collaboration is what this is all about. You know, there are people who have you seen this before? And, you know, it could be, oh, maybe this kind of sounds familiar. So you get to hear how someone else thinks about a particular issue. And I do like those things about us, definitely the problem solving, because that's literally all I've done my entire career. And then you get to collaborate, you know, because it's great when you aren't the only one. I've been places where I'm the only admin, right? And there's very few places, you know, like that anymore. There's always someone that you can kind of lean on and ask the question of. I do appreciate that collaboration and that you need a helping hand. Someone's there to help you because you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You know, there's nothing wrong with asking your colleague, have you seen this before? You know, because that saves you time. We only have the same 24 hours in a day. Why would you waste time to reinvent the wheel? Because someone could say, oh yeah, I can. But then you now know because you've seen the problem. You've been given the solution. You see, oh, this is how it works. And now you have that in your mental backpack and you can pull it out whenever you need to. So.
Yeah, I think you're dispelling another myth of software engineering that people think that you're working alone, But in fact, it is an extremely collaborative process, whether with your peers or your manager or other teams. You always have to work with stakeholders and customers. You always have to talk to people. And I want to do a shout out to my first mentor who taught me the 15-minute rule, which you kind of just described, where she was like, okay, what I need you to do is for 15 minutes, look at the documentation, look on the internet, try to figure it out. After 15 minutes, go explain it to your coworker who's sitting next to you. And they'll either have an answer.
I like that.
Or they'll rubber duck for you. And, depending on what you're working on, maybe your 15 minutes is actually an hour. But the idea is not to spin your wheels forever, and how it actually builds team cohesion to discuss things with each other. Because there's this psychological phenomenon where people like you better when you ask them for help. And if you're all asking each other for help, you're all going to like each other
That's
better.
amazing. I didn't know of that, but there is some truth into that. There's truth in that. I feel it. I've seen it. And, think about when you're new somewhere and you get to ask this person questions and they get to ask you questions, maybe not about your new job because you haven't been there, but about yourself. And you're having these conversations to get to know each other. So, yeah, I was really close with my colleagues because we were there for each other for so many years. I worked at one place for 8 years, you know what I mean? Another place for 6 years. You get to know people when that happens. And there's how that trust builds. And you grow as a team together. And nobody gets left behind, which I really do appreciate in that.
So let's bring it back to our original question
Yes.
about why you're not a software engineer. So you found it daunting. So we dispelled some myths. We dispelled that they're not smarter than you. They don't have skills that you don't have because you have all the skills necessary to be a software engineer. Is there anything else preventing you today from applying as a job as a software engineer? Tell me what else you think you're missing.
Well, I don't want to take a pay cut.
Yeah.
I'm so far past beginner. It would be very difficult for me. I have a mortgage, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's those things that, if I were 20, 30 years younger, it wouldn't be a big deal.
Yeah.
But, it's very hard. I know they say, oh, you can do it. You can always go back but in the reality of it, is it feasible? I mean, I know technology pays a lot of money.
Yes.
Technology pays very well, and it's the unknown. It's like, could I possibly make a living doing this? And it's really no way to know until you've gone through the exercise. But then again, time is money. And if you've unfortunately, they don't put, pay scales on a lot of jobs anymore. And they don't really want to tell you right away. So you could really be wasting hours of your time. And even applying to jobs, that's a time constraint. You have to craft your resume to the jobs you apply to. You have to write cover letters for some god-awful reason. You upload your resume, but you still have to type in it. It's work. And then, there was this little game we played today where we had to pick topics, and mine was, why is the interview process so long? And what's the sweet spot? I interviewed at one company, actually with Red Hat, and it was so many. I was like, I made up in my mind, I'm done.
Okay, let's talk about some options for you.
Okay.
One of them is the hack called networking, which you've already started because you're
Have I
here
heard of
today.
it? Oh, okay.
One thing that I went through a couple years ago is I cannot do another leak code problem. I am very good at my job. I am very good at solving problems for customers, making my company money. I am not good at leak code problems. Recursion just doesn't make sense in my brain. I don't care how many times I do it. So one of the things I researched and went to all these events about how to build your brand so it's less necessary to do those things. Okay. And then it's also about having conversations with companies. So one is building your brand in terms of showing off what you know. So blog posts, open source contributions, podcasts, speaking at conferences, those sort of things, which are all obviously work, right? So, and networking is also work. But there's just other options that you might be able to do if you don't like the other ones, so these are just options. And then having conversations with companies about their interview process. If a company isn't willing to be flexible on how you display your best self, then they probably won't be flexible when you work for them. So if you say to them, like, listen, I have a full-time job. Can't do like 5 hours, but how about I do a presentation on an open source project I've done? Like, you just do one project and show it to every company. Maybe they'll do that. If you came to me and I was interviewing and you said you just want to talk about a project, I'd be happy to do it. I have questions I can answer you like right away. I'd be like, oh, do you have logins? Do you have scale? Like stuff like that. And I love seeing someone who's made the effort to understand how the internet works. Like, I love seeing a project that's like dead simple, but it's really complex on the back end, where it's at least it goes from like a cloud service to a person. Like, you can go to the internet and I can click on a button and it returns information and it's gone through the whole process, because that shows that you've done something.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, obviously all of this is a lot harder than going through the traditional path, but it might lead you to some better results. And then as far as the money, that's where networking helps, because you can just ask people. It's not easy, because we've all been trained not to ask people how much money they make. But if you get to know people, I think you can do it.
Yeah.
It's actually really funny, and I'm going to mention it because I work at Netflix, as they always talk about paying top of market, and they've trained us. Like, if you're not sure if you're doing top of market, go ask your friends how much they're making. And that's helped me break the ice with people. Because I wanted to know for a role we were hiring, and I just like, well, work told me to ask you. Is it okay if I ask you? And like, I'm like, listen, you don't have to tell me. But if you can, that would be super nice. And it's just been really nice to be able to hear that information. And I obviously can't tell you if 20 years of sysadmin and then solution architect, if you're gonna make more money as a junior engineer at any company. Like, I don't know those exact numbers, but you'd at least be able to get a guess to see if it's close. And the other thing is, you'd be investing in your life and your future happiness. And you could also see, like, well, maybe, like, draw the line. By the time you're retired, if you were a software engineer, would you have made more money? Or if you stay a solution architect?
So to your point, you just hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
So there's a friend of mine in particular.
Yeah.
He was my cohort buddy. We're still like the best of friends. He's at the point right now in his career, he makes more than I do.
So how many years did that take?
4.
4.
Yeah.
How many more years until you, well, you don't have to tell me. You don't have to say your age. But let's say 10, 15 years from now, you'd be retiring. Mm-hmm. Do you think you'd be at more money if you went to software engineering, like more in your 401k? Or do you think you'd be less?
More.
Yeah. So it's an investment in yourself.
It is. That's interesting. And we were comfortable enough to have that conversation, right? So he was just like, yeah, I just got promoted and I'm making XYZ. And I was just like, we were comparing notes because I had just gotten this really big raise. And I was like, oh my God. And I thought about it. I was like, oh my God, he makes more than me, So, and he was a manager at Family Dollar and invested 6 months. He was teaching courses before the end of the cohort. That's how amazing he was. Yeah. And he's an amazing developer now. So I've seen it in action, but it doesn't, when you try on that coat, that, someone else's coat, it doesn't feel like it fits you. Like, could I do that? But, I guess believing in that possibility is really key for that transition.
And I think believing that we're all people and we're all trying. I think with every job, I've gotten to know more and more people in tech, and with all the networking, and mostly people just seem totally normal. Like, even people that have done amazing things, like people have written languages or invented databases, they just seem like people that saw a problem and methodically solved the problem. And while I'm not solving anything that's going to get me something huge like that, like I'm not building a new language.
Yeah.
I still feel like I'm having impact and I'm enjoying my life, and I like to have that impact at my company, and I love working in entertainment, so that's what brings me joy.
Awesome.
So like I always tell people, but like make sure to think about your industry and think about what your knowledge is. So you bring that too. Like, make sure to bring your industry knowledge. Like, what industry have you had the most impact in? Okay, I'm gonna give you one more hack.
Okay.
Which is changing careers at the company you're already at by asking for work before you've changed jobs. So this is what my first mentor did constantly. So we all came in as support engineers, and she got everyone promotions by having them first they shadow a person who has the job they want. And then she would have them take a couple tickets, like a bug or two, or whatever job it was. Or it would be like a shot or two because it was animation, or one or two things. And then that would work. And then I'd be like, okay, maybe I work for that team for like a week. See how that goes. And just kind of like trick them into hiring. So then the next time they had an opening, they'd be like, oh, why would you hire outside when you have this person who knows the company, has already done tickets for you, and is ready to start as soon as you're, because they don't have to wait for you to like quit and learn a new thing. You've already at that job. And a lot of people don't realize that they can do that they can just ask. Like if someone came to me from another department and they were like just doing like tech support or something, like, oh, I want to be a software engineer. I'd be like, come sit with me. Watch me debug this code. I think it's kind of boring, but like, maybe you'll find it interesting to see what I do all day. You'll watch me SSH into machines and catalogs all day, and you'll see what that would be like, And, use ChatGPT to look up Java syntax, because after 3 years I still haven't memorized it. But I think it's another way that people don't talk about. Is that where you don't have to get
That's genius.
another way. Yeah, my first mentor.
I love it.
Give her a shout out, Andrea Pace. She was wonderful.
Thanks, Andrea.
She like set the tone for my whole career.
That's impressive. So you've given me a lot to think about.
Mm-hmm.
The possibility is there. My best friend already showed me, one of my closest friends showed me it's possible. We were all adults going into this program, and I love the way that last one is possible. That is so possible. I work in a huge company.
Yeah.
And it's right for the picking.
That's perfect. All right, so we're gonna check back in 1 year from now.
At the
and
next
see how
link.
you've done. But I'm hoping that other people hear this too and think that they can also be a software engineer. And if you have any blockers, think to yourself, what is really blocking me? Like, what is that thing that's really blocking me? And is there a way around it? And maybe it's going in the window and not the front door.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you for sharing your story. That was so fun.
Thank you.